Some examples. Some are thinking like, what are examples? I'm not sure. When you hear these, as we go through, you'll be like, oh, I never even, some of you might have thought of this as advocacy, some of it may have not entered your mind. But eliminating or the abolition of slavery. At one time, slavery within the United States was constitutional. It was permitted by the law. It was, quote, the norm. But eventually, an amendment was passed abolishing slavery. Women's suffrage. If you look in this room, most of the individuals in this room are Wahine, and at one point in time, maybe not so much under Hawaiian Kingdom, but under the U.S. government, we could not vote at all. We had no say. We were considered property of our husbands if we were married, right? We had no say. We had no voice in voting. But at some point in time, women and other people came together and advocated and really fought and battled for the right to vote. Civil rights laws. The fact that at one point in time, there were segregation laws, right? If you're African American Black, you'd have to go to this school, an inferior school, or drink out of this water fountain versus other people. Seatbelts. If you talk to our parents or grandparents, there was no law saying you had to put on a seatbelt, right? Yep. When you drove. Yep. And there was not even child safety seats. My mom was just telling me the other day, when we were little, quote, they would just hold us and you would just drive safely. There was no such thing. And now I'm thinking, oh my God, I would never put my baby into a car without a safety seat, right? So you see how over time, something that might not be the norm, when you advocate and push for changes, can become the norm, can become the new thing that everybody sees as something that in every day, it's like, drinking water. At some point, people could dump things into the water, anything, poisons, chemicals, pesticides, and not have any type of penalties. Well, we have laws to make sure that the water is not as contaminated. Well, there's always issues there too, right? Drunk driving laws. At a point in time, people could get into their car, suck them up at the bar, drive home, not even worry about DUI. And smoke-free environments. At one point in time, people could smoke wherever, any place. Airplanes, trains, restaurants, hospitals. And now you see that kind of changing. And even on this campus, there's kind of been a push advocacy to make the campus smoke-free at some point. The hospital recently enacted that policy, and I would suspect that probably within the next couple of years, it may happen on this campus too. But let's look at some examples closer to home. So think about over 100 years ago. Think about all the men and women, Kupuna, every island that signed the Ku'e petitions, right? In protest to what was happening. That is a form of advocacy. And you think about how many signed, more than the vast majority, from island to island, how hard it was maybe to get to certain districts, and yet people had a strong belief and signed those petitions. Kaho'olawe, if you look back, earlier part of 19th century, bombing occurring, right? Desecration of the land, until people gathered and some people put their life on the lines to end the bombing there. Revitalization of Hawaiian language, as Kaimi was sharing, back then you have to, lucky if your child got their name, right, pulled from a hat, and that battle continues because there still is a push to have emerging schools, more schools on the island, not just one place, maybe in campus, and then expand it elsewhere in other districts in which you live. Some of you may not be as familiar with this, but some years ago, maybe a decade ago, there were a number of students in Manoa who were pushing at the state legislature, testifying that all Native Hawaiian students should receive tuition waivers, right? How many of you guys would support something, tuition waivers for all Native Hawaiians? Yeah. That's something you guys can push for. Yeah. UHMC. You guys how many of you have heard of Laulu? Okay, so a few of you, we're going to talk tonight a little bit about what Laulu is and what your role and place in that is. You guys hearing about right now the GMO moratorium? So currently this year, on the ballot, for those of you who are registered for the county, you can vote in favor of a moratorium, meaning that there's going to be a temporary stop to genetically modified organisms within the county until they do additional studies and show that it's safe. So some people support the GMO moratorium, some people oppose it. Those who oppose it are putting out a lot of ads on the radio, on TV, and calling it a ban against farming. So you see how you pitch the message, how you advocate is very powerful. And I'm sure that sometimes within our own families, people have different views upon things and it can get very So these are general tips, and then we're going to share what is Lulu. Actually, Kaori-Lei is going to come up and talk about Lulu, and then we're going to have an actual activity. So this is how I kind of remember advocacy tips. There's actually the name Advocacy. So I try to use acronyms because it's easier to remember. The first thing, A, what is your aim? What is your goal? What is your message? So if I was up here and let's say testifying before the state legislature and saying, aloha, my name is so-and-so, I am here because I testify in support of tuition waivers for all Native Hawaiian students.
Yeah.
Does that message seem clear why I'm here? Or what I just said, what I'm asking for? So the audience who maybe had never talked to you about your issue before should be clear. What are you asking for? Have you ever like watched county council hearing or state or something else where people are talking for a long time, but you're like, I'm not really sure what they're asking for? So you want to be very focused. What is your aim? What is your message? And is that being conveyed clearly to your audience? So another example, let's say if I stand up here and say, hello, my name is Kaori-Lei Shirota. I'm here because I oppose this bill to incarcerate more Hawaiians and transfer them to prisons in the mainland. Was that clear? What I'm advocating against? Spending more money transferring prisoners, particularly Hawaiians, to mainland prisons. Okay? Or the opposite. I am here in support because I believe that all of our keiki in Hawaii should have a free preschool education. Pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
There's actually an initiative right now happening to push for preschool through the state level. B, your position should be brief. Because some of you, when you go to the county council hearings, some of them are open-ended, you don't have any like set time. But some of these hearings, you have like 2 minutes to get your message across, and literally, you might stand on a podium and there will be these little lights, like a green light or a red light, and there will be like go and then stop. It might give you like a 30-second warning, and you have to wrap up your sentence. So whenever your audience is, you want not keep going on and on and on, because one, the human attention span can only last so long. And if somebody's listening to testimony 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours later, you can bet that they're tired. So you want to sort of maximize when you get up there, what is your message, and keep it brief. And also, you can say some things that maybe build upon what somebody else says, but kind of like share a little bit of your story that makes it personalized. Just like how Kaini shared about her son, and about advocating for both of her children. So A, aim, B, brief, C, convincing. And you guys have a PowerPoint in case you want to take any notes or anything. The content of why you're asking for something, why you want something to change. This is where you need to do your homework. Sometimes we repeat something to someone just because we heard somebody else said it. This is my caution to you. To be an effective advocate, it's not that you can't repeat what somebody else says, but just because somebody else says it doesn't make it true. So it really is important to do your homework too. Now, let's say if I'm used to going to Kaini to ask her questions about Kaori-Lei because she's a parent, she's very involved. She may be a great resource for me to go to and talk to. But if somebody else is telling me something else too that's different, for me to hold the credibility if I'm making an argument for something, I want to make sure that I do some of my homework. Sometimes people will get up and testify and make these bold statements like, all students, this happened, or all of that. Anytime somebody says all, always, I can tell you a lot of people who are policymakers are like, this person is just being exaggerating, or maybe inflating numbers. So you want to be convincing, you want to use support. Some of it might be data. Some people, and you got to know who your audience is, some people that you talk to, they're going to want to know numbers. Okay, well, I support that program, but how much is it going to cost? How long do we have to fund you? They want to know the data and the budget. Some people could care less about the budget. They're like, you know what, I support it, we'll find a way to make it happen. But when you go before a body of people trying to change laws or support for programs, you also want to kind of know who is in your audience and kind of speak to, if I know that this legislature really likes numbers, I'm going to throw out some numbers to them. If I know this person is really like, will remember this story, and it's a touching story that might bring them to tears, I'm going to share that story. Because you have to think about your audience as being diverse and speaking to sort of their broad diversity of experiences. So D, going back to the absentee. How will you deliver your message? And that requires really a plan. So think about it. If you have a group, like let's say the Hui, right on campus, usually a lot of organizations have leadership where they'll elect someone and that person may be their spokesperson. But there might be other times within your team or organization or group, you guys may decide, you know what? Let's have Kaini go and talk to the Speaker of the House or someone else. Why? Because she knows that person. She has a relationship with that person. Or it could be the opposite. Maybe I'm not going to ask Kaini because maybe she doesn't have a good relationship with that person. Not that I'm picking on Kaini, but you think about it. Sometimes the message is more effective depending on who delivers it to you, right? So I might think about a mother and child. A mother tells their child, don't do something. And the kid's like, whatever, mom's talking to me. But somebody else, maybe an uncle, cousin, friend, like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that. They might hear that message more clearly just because of who's delivering it, not so much the message itself. The same is true of advocacy. Now, E, executing. So plans are great. Let's say you decide, okay, the Hui, we're going to meet on this day, we're going to have some presentation form. Plans are great, but it's only as good as the execution, right? You need to at some point act upon your plan and execute it. And I always tell people, envision success. And what I mean by that, some battles are harder to win, right? I put a whole bunch of little post-its over here. I'm sorry I didn't put it in bold print, but these are some things I put on words. Incarceration, homelessness, preschool, death penalty, abortion, food security, immigration, sovereignty. These are huge issues, right? Some of it local, some of it, if you look at state, national, international. Sometimes some battles seem like uphill, but you have to think about it. Even if it's an uphill battle, if you already feel defeated going into it, then likely how you talk to the people, how you present it, they might not be as convinced. Okay, so you have to go in thinking that, you know what, collectively we can make change. And sometimes that change could happen overnight, literally, and sometimes that change may take years or decades or centuries. Some people look at the sovereignty movement and say, oh, that's not going to happen. If you look at what happened to Great Britain and India in terms of England having power over India, right? And through civil resistance, not through war, but through peaceful protests, Gandhi and others, they were able to release this quote superpower from controlling their country. There's other issues that they face today, but at that time, people said that would never happen. England is a superpower. There's no way this would occur, but they believed, they continued, persisted, and things changed. At the end of the day, the E part is important, evaluating your successes or your effectiveness. Because some tactics, if you have a long-term kind of goal or strategy, some tactics will be very effective, some of them not so effective. The thing is, if something's not effective, don't keep doing the same thing over and over. Switch gears, change things up of it. So assess your short and long-term goals. So how do we advocate? At home, how many of you guys talk to your family about different things that are going on in the community, like GMO, sovereignty, war, preschools, immersion? Does everybody have kind of conversations at home with families? Okay, in the classroom, right? Sometimes there's very heated discussions, debates. You think about writing. Writing is an act of advocacy. You might write a letter to the editor. You might write an editorial. Some of you might write a blog. Some of you might be posting things on Facebook about your position on something, right? That is all advocacy. At a community forum, at a legislative hearing, at a protest or march, holding up a sign, those are all advocacy. And some people are on the front lines. So it's not always verbal, because sometimes people think, oh, advocacy means like the person who's kind of up there and shouting. A lot of advocacy to be effective is that people have a plan and they're executing behind the scenes. And it's sometimes the people that you don't even see up front that are the most powerful advocates. So a lot of times at the state legislature, national level, laws that are changed or not changed, it's because people pay lobbyists, people who get paid money to go and talk to legislatures and say, support this bill or don't support this bill. And they never even testify publicly ever. It's all closed doors.